Hello and welcome to the Wild Wonder podcast, where we seek to demystify and democratize holistic wellness practices by speaking with today's leading practitioners. Today we have Cuban-American writer, speaker, crisis consultant, and ayahuasca enthusiast, Ikam Acosta. Welcome.
Hi, how are you? I'm happy to be here. Thank you so
I'm
much.
good. Welcome back to the podcast. Last time you were here, we were talking about shadow work.
Yes.
Um, so this is related. We're going to talk a little bit about the grief growth cycle, the importance of processing grief in order to get to your own inner sense of power, some aftercare and integration, as well as maybe some plant medicine ceremony. So I can't wait to get started. I think
Yep.
it's particularly important during this time of year. I know you have more insight than me, but it seems like now as we're going into fall in the northern hemisphere, that people begin to kind of come into closer contact with their own grieving processes or and I wonder why that is. Do you have any insight into why maybe
Yeah,
we all go through this process?
I think it's because, first of all, the veil is thinning. It's, as in Samhain nears, it's just a closer connection to the other side. But also, I think going into the darker parts of the year, it's more like a renewal process. So we have the spring where, you think of birth, and then summer, the height of life, and then fall, it's kind of like you're going back into the darkness. The days are getting shorter, it's getting darker. So we tend to go inward a little bit, and we tend to really connect with our shadow self more and more,
Mm-hmm.
as the cycle um, goes farther along. So I think that is just like a natural tendency, and also, not just humans, but also in a lot of myths, a lot of, different religions and spiritual practices as well.
Right. And maybe we're a little disconnected here in the United States from these traditional practices of grieving. How do you see that showing up in our culture? Like, if we deny that we are grieving, what are some of the symptoms that start to show up when we just pretend that we're not going through this process?
I think we have a natural tendency to avoid death and the topic of death because it's so scary and has such a negative connotation. So people are afraid to talk about it. They're afraid to really show how they grieve. Just because, I mean, it could be a hot mess. Let's face it. When we're grieving, it's really a tough time. You go
Mm-hmm.
through all these emotions. Healing is not linear. It's not like one day it's going to be better than the last. No, it could be good days, and then all of a sudden you're in this deep dark pit, and you're all back to square one. So I think it's just a really tough process, and it's really hard for people to deal with it. And of course, you don't want to talk about your family members eventually dying. It's, a really uncomfortable topic. So people don't really face it while they're alive or while their loved ones are alive. They
Mm-hmm.
tend to face it after something tragic happens, or,
Right.
after they're facing mortality. So I think that's also deters you from kind of jumping right into the healing process, just because there's been such a resistance, and we're so connected to the physical plane. We're so connected to our bodies and, the reality that we know, that we're not really in touch with, the other side or what happens after. And a lot of, we're conditioned also, if you don't see things, they're not there. So,
Mm-hmm.
you do tend to think of your loved ones as gone forever, and you don't really think of the energy, the connection, maybe messages that come after, things like that. And so I think there's just a natural avoidance to that whole
Mm-hmm.
topic for so many reasons.
And this avoidance, does it show up somehow? Like, do you see it come out in a personality, this sense of avoidance? Are there any negative symptoms to doing that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of anger, or repressed anger, repressed rage, a lot of, I guess, hesitation to deal with your own issues, because you don't want to face that darkness, you don't want to face that grief, that, the depressive episodes, the anxiety over losing somebody, or not having somebody there that has been a part of your life for so long. So there could be a lot of things that come up, emotionally, spiritually, mentally, and even physically, just, the tightness in the body, because emotion is obviously, stored in the body in so many
Mm-hmm.
ways. So it could really have a lot of repercussions if you don't really integrate that whole part of yourself, the light and the dark. Going back to shadow work, yeah.
I once read that grief was held in the lungs. And that was, I mean, it's true for me. I'm not saying it's true for everybody. But when I bring that to mind, when I'm having trouble breathing, or I feel like I'm getting choked up and I don't know why, I try to connect with that and allow myself to grieve. So I wonder if that's like one symptom that you could kind of like move through if you just
Yeah.
allowed yourself to grieve without even knowing why you're grieving at first.
Yeah, and breathwork is so connected to emotions, and I think breathing and doing constant breath work and just different practices really connects you to your body, but also to spirit. And I think it allows for that duality, just that connection of the interior and the exterior. So it would totally make sense that, you're constricted, if you're having that avoidance of feeling those feelings.
Mm-hmm.
Because, when we're nervous, we kind of have that short, shallow breath,
Mm-hmm.
and we have to really get into it and really, have that deep breath, to really feel everything, to be in touch with those emotions.
Or even holding back tears. I think that's where mine comes from because we're not in a society that allows for that very often, especially as a woman where you're trying to, tune into your masculine side in order to be perceived more powerful or in control. I think that's also a way of not allowing the grief to come up. And then there's that sense of control and constriction.
Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah.
So since we live in kind of, I think what you're describing is we live kind of in a death negative society, what would it mean to live in a death positive society?
I think instead of mourning, I think it would be more of like a celebration or like a welcoming, to the afterlife, kind of like a graduation ceremony,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to like just a goodbye, And I
Mm-hmm.
think just acknowledging those cycles of birth and death and rebirth, that happen naturally, I think is very important. And, also I think it also has to do a lot with our connection to the earth, because, we all only see the material. And I think, in cultures that have that more open-minded connection to the earth, there's more evidence of those cycles being practiced. We take from the earth and then we go back to the earth. So it's that whole regeneration
Mm-hmm.
process that you don't see as an ending, but a continuity. And I think
Right.
that's so important to also look at it in that frame of light.
Right. I'm just thinking about how death negative we are in that kind of like that old movie, The Beach, how we just like ship our older people off somewhere so we don't even have to look at them, and how
Yeah.
our society is so segregated that like people live in a building with only young people and you don't see any older folks, and then there's, elderly residences and elder care and nursing homes, and how that must mess with our idea of like this natural progression of life unto death unto life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I get a lot of that also from my callers as a crisis counselor. I get a lot of people who are isolated, or people, who just have no family or have been shunned just because they're sick or elderly
Hmm.
or just not contributing to society anymore. And that's so, that's sad. It gives you that sense of, if you're not producing, if you're not, valuable to somebody or something, then you get dismissed. And I think that's also another important point to, to focus on.
Yeah, like how do
And
we move?
also, in other cultures, the sages or elders, and that crone imagery. There's a lot
Right.
of wisdom in age. Here we tend to kind of like, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, old man, and
Yeah.
it's just so awful, because there is that wisdom and there is that connection to your past and to your ancestors that is so crucial for your growth.
Yeah, we even do it to ourselves. I think we could see it in like this plastic surgery boom. Like, who are we fooling? Like, we're getting older. Like, like I'm okay if you want to do nip tucks and all this thing, but to deny the very existence of aging, I
Yeah.
think is when we fall into trouble.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that resistance. And anything that has resistance is definitely going to constrict you more. If you go with the flow, it's going to be more natural, it's going to be more healthy, you're going to be more open and just more accepting of what is, that radical acceptance of, okay, you're in this state now, but you got to realize that, you do your best, but there's also where you're headed, and the obstacles you're facing. So I think just holding that radical acceptance kind of attitude really can help a lot.
Right, and I think it also sets an example for others when we allow for that. Like, yeah, I have a wrinkle because I'm this age. That's what happens, like instead
Yeah,
of always trying to, I don't know, look 20 because we have this hyper fixation on youth here and we miss
exactly.
so much. I think that's why a lot of our culture is stuck in this sense of adolescence. Maybe even like the first chakra, we don't move up in the chakra system to be able to explore these other sides and these transitions. So, yeah, I
Yeah.
think it's fantastically important. How do you see, now you say like messages, you said messages from the other side.
Yeah.
So you see death as a continuation. What is something that Well, what do you believe after we die? What it is that you believe?
Well, here's the thing. I've studied so many weird,
Yeah.
religious paths and everything, and different religions, and obviously we don't know what happens for certain. And the way I see it, it's kind of like a continuum in the sense that energetically, it's the way always seen it is kind of like tuning into a radio station. Some people are
Hmm.
more sensitive and they're able to tune into that frequency and receive those messages, or have more of the connection. Um, eh, and as far as like transitioning ourselves, the way I see it is just our energetic body doesn't go away. It just doesn't
Hmm.
disappear. It has to go somewhere. So,
Hmm.
we're less locked into our physical state. But I think our consciousness really continues. And that's just my, personal opinion. Obviously, there's no answers, but that's just how I've, always
Hmm.
perceived it and just engaged with it. From
Hmm.
time, I just received that kind of information, and it's just a lot of weird coincidences and
Yeah.
synchronicities and messages that have been validated, things like that. So that's just been my belief.
So you feel it is possible that after a relative dies and there are now some form of consciousness, that they could reach out to us on the physical plane in some way.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And I mean, I could be delusional. That's perfectly normal. But but it's just been funny because I've gotten like just really interesting messages and have really interesting experiences throughout my whole life.
Mm. Can you explain one, if you don't mind, of those
Um,
coincidences?
Just, I guess messages in dreams or messages in ceremony, or just message, like you'll be just going about your day one day and then, it's like you channel some information and then you go to a certain place and find what you're looking for. It's just stuff like that. That's just really
Hmm.
bizarre that I can't explain in any physical kinds of way, except for that, just that receiving of information. And there's so many ways of knowing, not
Hmm.
just the five senses, but there's just all sorts of ways to gather information. And I think
And
that's one of them.
do
Yeah.
you think that happened for you naturally, or did you begin a practice that allowed you to open up to this like newfound awareness?
I've always had that connection since I was a kid, just like pondering it and just reading a lot about it, things like that. But I think that with more practice and with more awareness, you do tend to notice more. So the
Hmm.
things that you thought were maybe coincidence, it's like, oh wow, well this is, there's something here, there's something I should explore. And of course, always do it, discern with all your discernment. It's not just like, oh, it's fine, you always have to really just process it and analyze it, see if it applies, see if it resonates, see if it makes sense.
Hmm.
And the same thing with dreams. And that's the thing. I mean, it could be symbols, it could be, your collective consciousness, whatever it may be. It's just receiving that information just
Hmm.
gives you so much awareness and intuition and power. And I think that's so important to really be in touch with that because we tend to really just passively accept the things that we hear or see from
Hmm.
others, from experts, from television, from celebrities, which is kind of
Hmm.
ridiculous.
Right.
But also, it's just a matter of really trusting yourself and your knowing and your intuition. I think
How
that's
would
it.
a person that maybe they've never even heard of someone passing on to the other side and being able to communicate, and how would you tell them to get started?
Um, I would say that's a tough question because everybody's so different, and
Right.
the ways you connect are so different. As far as I mean, I would just because it's funny because a lot of also my callers say like after somebody passes like they'll feel a presence, they think they're going crazy, they'll feel something on their shoulder, and all I would say to them is just pretty much just what is that energy telling you, just what are you feeling, what's moving
Hmm.
through you, what comes to your mind. Don't censor your thoughts in the sense that you dismiss them because you can't see them or you think they're crazy or something. And journaling is so important also, just writing down patterns, writing down experiences, dream
Hmm.
journaling.
Hmm.
There's a lot of voyaging that goes on during the night, not just dream wise with lucid dreaming or getting symbols, but also, if you do energy work and astral projection, things like that, there's many ways of receiving information. So it's just explore, everything that interests you, everything that calls to you, everything that you feel resonates with you and makes sense to you. And everybody's going to be different. Some people are more visual, some people are more auditory, some people just have that sense of knowing. And so it's really hard to really have a guideline for everybody. So it's
Hmm.
just follow your true self and be authentic with your receiving of the information.
But I think what you're doing is giving everyone permission. You're giving
Yeah.
them a sense of allowing, because I think we can't hear or receive anything until we allow ourselves to possibly believe in its existence. Like, we're not saying it definitely exists, we're saying maybe. And
Yeah.
I think what you're doing for people is you're allowing them that maybe that opens a little window for them to then explore what they believe.
Yes, yeah, and that's so important because also we've been so culturally conditioned to repress that or to not, I guess, acknowledge it because it hasn't been proven or it's not real to most people. So a lot of times I think we dismiss our true instincts and our true intuition, and we miss a lot that way.
Mm-hmm.
We deny ourselves that path of knowing or that way of receiving that information. And I mean that's I think a disservice to ourselves a
Yeah.
lot of the time.
What can that do for someone, in the throes of grief, to maybe begin to believe that the person that they are grieving is somehow still there, is still relevant in their lives?
Well, it definitely provides comfort, I think that's the main thing. And also, it's just, I think it gives you that continued connection, to yourself and to that loved one, and also to your lineage, to your ancestors, because now you're in touch with this other possibility, this other realm. So I think it makes you want to do a lot of inner exploration and just also, just that connection with the other person that doesn't have to end, and the fact that because we still love, even though we
Mhm.
live like two different cities away or whatever, it doesn't mean that you can't stop loving when somebody's, passed on. So
Right.
I think it just gives you that sense of, it connects you to the eternal, in the sense
Mhm.
that it doesn't have that separation of life and death or that notion of ending. I think it's more of like a connection to yourself too, making
Mhm.
you, that eternal consciousness, and just being aware of that, I think is
Yeah.
important.
That actually made me think about not just endings in terms of death, but endings in terms of relationships. People that have stopped, maybe not even not love each other anymore, but they can't cohabitate anymore. Or they move away, or friendships fall apart. And I think, at least personally, when I allowed myself to still love that person instead of closing that door, like that person doesn't exist anymore, like we're going to put that in a box over here in my past and we don't have to think about it anymore. That caused me more suffering to do that sense of like trying to ignore and replace, than allowing myself to be more open to the idea that I could still share love energetically with this person who is not physically there.
Yeah, and I think also it's less torturous on yourself, because if you have that resentment, if you have that anger, if you have that grief, you're constricting yourself. The other person's oblivious to how you're feeling, so it's really not hurting them. So I think it's more also for yourself, coming to terms with that and holding that, space for growth and for kind of acknowledging the fact that, yeah, things end, certain relationships are important, certain points in your life, and some people come in and out for a reason, and it doesn't have to be a negative thing that they leave. It could just be a lesson or, just an addition to your life, that was a bonus that maybe you wouldn't
Right.
have had before. So, yeah.
Right, or even endings for ourselves, right? There's like, as we go through the growth process or even maturation process biologically, we have to continuously say goodbye to a version of ourselves that no longer exists. And I
Yes.
personally, like, I find the biggest struggle with like to be able to like bless that person and thank them and grieve that former life in order to move on, because even if that this new life seems better on paper, like you're getting finally these things that you've always wanted, part of me at least is always kind of grieving what I left, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think also that you mentioned that it reminded me of the whole notion of our sense of identity. A lot of times our sense of identity limits us, and we
Yeah.
think that we're the same person that we have been since birth. Because that's our personality, that's our identity. But we constantly grow and change. Moment to moment, even. We're
Hmm.
not the same person we were 5 minutes ago. So it's natural that you won't be the same person next year or next week, even. And I think that's important, having that fluidity, that notion of fluid identity in the sense of your consciousness and what you acquire day to day, your experiences, your feelings, your thoughts,
Hmm.
things you've overcome, changing false or limiting beliefs. I think all that is so crucial in realizing that.
Yeah, and it keeps us from being rigid or angry old people.
Yeah.
I think people always think, I find it funny, people that don't engage with the elderly often always think that everybody matures into these like beautiful older people that are like so carefree and just like super kind. I'm like, that is not always the case. Like, I don't think we all mature in that way. There's some people that hold on so tightly to identity that when they get into their older years are just angry and closed off. And then, of course, you have those beautiful examples of people that are open and they've been like going with the flow and now they've arrived here and they've lived this full life. But it's not all of us. So there is some work to be done in there.
Oh, absolutely. And I think gratitude is so important also in that sense, the gratitude of your experiences, of your lessons, how you've progressed through the years. And when we were talking about aging earlier, I mean, everybody wants to be, in their 20s, but I mean, we were so insecure back then. We didn't know
Right.
what life was about. I don't want to go back to that place. I'm so much more comfortable now, and as I age and learn new things and experience new things, I'm more comfortable in my skin. I'm more comfortable in my experiences and in dealing with adversity and dealing with obstacles. Just because you're like, oh, I went through that, I can do this. And all the lessons you learn and all the experiences that you have, I think really shape you into the person that, that you want to become.
Yeah, absolutely. At this age, I try to give gratitude and think back, especially in instances which I catch myself being like, wow, that event would have flatlined me at 20. Like
Yeah.
I would have been unable to get out of bed for like a week, and now at this age, I'm like,
Yes,
next.
totally.
But we always hear about the grieving process in terms of steps. Was it Kubler-Ross's like 5 stages of grieving? Do you
Yeah.
agree with that idea? I mean,
I
you are
think,
a crisis counselor, so you would see the grieving process in real time.
yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of people, but I think again, everybody grieves differently. Some people are more angry, some people are more in denial, some people are more accepting of it. And I just think it really depends on the tools that you have and your preparation for death and your preparation for dealing with death. And talking about it is so important, just because in trauma therapy in general, talking is processing. So, you can do, I mean, I used to do traumatic incident reduction with clients, TIRs, and, there's always TIR for past traumas, but nobody ever thinks of doing a future TIR, for, well, let's experience the worst possible scenario kind of thing. And then, that way you're prepared. And it doesn't have to be in a clinical setting. It could just be journaling about it. It could be talking about it, just really being open and honest with what you have to say and what you're dealing with and the feelings that you're going to encounter. And I think just being prepared for that phase of your life, whether it's your own mortality or somebody else's, is so important, just to have the skill set, to have all the coping mechanisms that you can have so you can be more resilient and get through it in an easier fashion.
You say it's a TRI?
TIR.
DRI? I can't
Traumatic.
speak today.
Oh, yeah. Traumatic incident reduction. So it's
Traumatic incident reduction.
yeah, and that's honestly a really good trauma therapy. A lot of people have heard of EMDR as a trauma intensive technique, but TIR is just pretty much for telling the story over and over again until it loses its charge. And I was lucky to have a great mentor, my director from the trauma agency that I started with, and she still does these. She even does them online. She's moved to Costa Rica now, but yeah, it's just such a wonderful technique. I would see people come into the agencies with like 20 or 30 years of therapy, and then after a few sessions, they're like, "This is the first time I've been able to access that memory without it triggering me. It doesn't feel like it's happening all over again." And I think that's the magic of processing. Just because traumatic thoughts are stored differently than regular thoughts. Regular thoughts are more like, "Oh, I had breakfast today." They're very matter of fact. Traumatic energy is just it's happening all over again. Even if it happened 50 years ago, you have that fight or flight chemicals kicking in and you're in that state of panic and you're reliving everything. So what trauma intensive, therapies like TIR does is it bridges, those, it pretty much relocates that type
Wires.
of, yeah, rewires. And so it's really amazing the results it can have. So anything that involves, that type of processing, that type of just getting that energy out, so it doesn't trigger you. And so you're able to access these thoughts and feelings without feeling that overflow of chemistry going through your body is just really important in this
Yeah,
process.
because the body doesn't know the difference. I was reading about this in actually I was studying fictional literature and how it affects the body. So there's this idea in psychology of theory of mind, which is the ability of when you read something of your body to actually think that you're there. Say you're reading about like eating ice cream and you're like feeling the coldness on your tongue and your body's going through all the sensations as if it were actually happening to you. So I'm imagining as you're speaking that this kind of trauma therapy would be the same thing. They're kind of bringing them through the story so their body can kind of process everything and then move it out. Is that fair?
Yeah, because traumatic memories, a lot of times people don't remember what went on, the details. They just remember like the sights, sounds, the major impressions. So what it does, traumatic memories have to be triggered. So essentially by repetition, you're triggering the person, right? And so, but it's in a safe space. So you don't stop right there. And that's the important thing. It's not like a 50-minute session where you're like all the way up here. It's like, see you next week. No, it's going to take as long as it takes. Sometimes I've had sessions take 3 hours, if that's as long as it takes. Because with that repetition, you're moving that, that chemistry, that energy, and you're pretty much relocating those thoughts to a point where they can be a matter of fact kind of memory. And yeah, it's still tragic, it's still awful, but it's just become, a memory, a really bad memory, but it doesn't have that physiological response. And another important thing is the integration of memory. A lot of times in times of trauma, we fail to have memory consolidation. So you don't have the full picture, you don't have all the information. So by bringing all that up to the surface, you start piecing things together and you start making connections and you start, a lot of people, have blank spots in their lives. They can't, they have blackout periods or they can't remember, if it's a traumatic period or a period of grief, everything seems like a blur. And it's because of that, because you're not consciously aware of the descriptive details as much as you are in like a declarative memory, like what you had for breakfast or where you went yesterday. Yeah.
I think first thought I would, when you said that, is if there's a traumatic memory that I don't remember, I probably don't want to remember it. So imagine getting a person to even go through this is probably difficult.
It is.
Most of us would think, like, let's just keep that blacked out. That's cool. I don't remember 8 through 12. Fantastic. But what does that do to a person when you keep that in the dark?
Well, it still affects us on a subconscious level. I can tell you that. So you might not might not be consciously aware of it, where you're avoiding it or in denial that it happened, or maybe just don't even remember. But it does affect our, our interactions, our relationship to ourselves, our, limiting beliefs, our relationship to others, and pretty much how you live your life, and of course you're always triggered by it. You're just not aware of it. You might not be aware of what's causing your anxiety or depression, but it's there. It's always there. And there's that metaphor of pulling the splinter. You can't heal until it's out. It's going to fester. It's going to, it's going to hurt to pull it, but it's going to, at least that's the first step to healing, addressing that and really coming face to face with it. But it's hard. It's hard work. I'm not going to lie. It's pretty intense,
Yeah, I think it was so cool when I did my trauma-informed therapy training. It showed me that our ability to hold our own trauma or to experience and then release our own trauma allows us to then be able to hold space for another person in trauma, especially if that person is experiencing the same trauma that you went through.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. And people ask me, why don't you take, you're not like affected by these calls or by these sessions. I'm like, no, because one of the first things I learned, and I was grateful again to study under Teresa, was that, you have to be, first of all, present for the other person. You can't be thinking like, oh, this happened to me. No, it's not about you. It's about the other person. You can't connect it to your personal life. You can't be thinking about, oh, my cousin went through this, my uncle went through this, my mother went through this, I went through this, because then you're not going to be aware. And guess what? All that subconscious information is seeping into you. So you're going to be triggered, and also another really important thing besides remaining present is be aware if you're in session and you're being triggered, why, and then do your work on it. You don't want to stick with that. You don't want to really carry that. The more work you do on yourself, the easier it is to hear other people's story and sit with other people without having to really have that aversion to, to the information or to that kind of energy.
I've actually seen it on the other end too, where I'm telling a story that maybe I don't feel as traumatic anymore. Maybe I've processed it. And the other person is so unable to process the information that they will I've even seen somebody actually like check out, like leave. You know? And you're like, okay. And you're like, oh, that's, if you're aware enough, you're like, oh, that's a trigger for them, something they haven't worked through. And then you could also see it in yourself of the times I've done it when I'm like, oh, this person is telling me a story, and it might not even be something that happened to me, but it's something that I fear might happen to me. And I think that takes it back to the whole aversion of death, because if we're avoiding death, anytime death happens around us, which it happens all the time, we're going to like step out of the situation. We're not going to be present for the people that are actually grieving.
Yeah, yeah, and that's true. And you don't want to be not present for them, but also not present for yourself. You know, you have to step into your life fully.
Hmm.
And part of it is embracing that fear and that, you know, acceptance to the unknown. Because I mean, we fear what we don't know. I mean, let's
Hmm.
face it. It's that's just the thought of it is scary than actually going through it, you know.
Right.
A lot of times our anxiety is just, you know, when we get to that point, we're like, oh, this was it, really? and,
Yeah.
and so I think that it's a lot of it's just apprehension and just not being okay with not knowing and not being okay with the uncertainty and the chaos of it all. You know, we want order, we want, you know, pretty things in boxes, you know,
Yeah.
but no, life is chaotic and you know, and it should be because you know how boring would it be if we knew everything that was going to happen, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how constricting that would be to be like, I mean, you know those people too. I mean, we all do it. Like as we get older, we want to be safer and safer and safer. And then oftentimes our lives get more and more boring because we're like, oh no, I've discovered that I really like to wake up at 7 o'clock and have my coffee and read my New York Times and like be in my little box and not talk to anybody. You do that enough over time, your life becomes really boring.
Yeah, yeah. And once you stop growing or just exploring new things, you know, that's it. Your identity is more cemented, you know, and you're less fluid, you're less, you know, open to new experiences and spontaneity. And yeah, that could really lock you into, you know, just a really routine, you know, that could be a prison really a lot of the
Mhm.
time.
I think that takes us into the idea of experiencing grief to get to our inner sense of power. Can you explain how that would work or why that would happen even?
Yeah, I think that a lot of times when we grieve, we really become honest, you know, with ourselves and with our emotions. You know, if you truly are introspective and kind of want to get in touch with that, you know, a lot of times we're just sad and don't
Mhm.
really process things. But if you, once you get in touch with that, with, you know, your darkness, your fears, your, you know, your apprehensions, it really causes you to really go inward, you know, and do a lot of the work that maybe you haven't really focused on before because it hasn't come up, or, you know, maybe you've been avoiding it for whatever reason. And I think grieving helps us kind of crack open our hearts in the sense that, you know, it allows you to feel, it allows you to be more human, you know, more humble, more connected to others, you know, in a sense, because it's a human experience. You know, grieving is part of everybody's life. You know, let's
Mhm.
face it, we're going to grieve at some point or another. So I think it connects you to again the eternal, you know, because it's that
Mhm.
whole process of birth and rebirth, but also the collective experience, and it really opens up the whole range of emotions that we were probably never in touch with before. And you know, any sort of new experience, any sort of growth, any sort of integration of yourself is so important. Yeah, just for you
Mhm.
to continue of that in that process of becoming, you know, of your end goal, you know, actualizing your potential.
Mhm.
You have to experience every range of experiences, you know, theoretically as a soul, you know. And so I think that's very important in your evolution, you know, not just your life here, but your spiritual evolution.
And if we think about grieving and this process of moving from grieving into inner power, you mentioned that there's an integration process that happens after. Can you speak to that? What the aftercare would look like after this grieving process as you move out and toward inner power?
Yeah, and I think aftercare also, not just in the grieving process, but any sort of session, you know, whether it's a trauma session, a ceremony, you know, healing ceremony, or just your personal grief. You know, it's really easy to go through that range of emotions, to really on your own time, you know, in private. But it's so hard when you're out in the world, you know, and you have to interact with people, and you're going through it, and you're triggered, and you don't want to deal with anybody, you know, you just want to stay home and be under the covers, you know. And I think that it allows you to really have more strength and resiliency when you have to do that integration, that daily life, you know, because it's easy. One of the messages that I got from ceremony one time was that it's easy to heal in a vacuum, you
Hmm.
know, because you have so much chaos going on around you and you're just like, shut up, you know.
Yeah.
But then, you know, and you know, it's easy to heal in a vacuum. You know, if you're a Buddhist on a mountaintop, yeah, good for you. I mean, it's
Yeah.
awesome, but it's really easy to really be at peace. It's really
Hmm.
hard when you're amidst the chaos, you know, when you're really surrounded by, you know, by grief or death or just chaos, or just people or just noise, everyday noise of, you know, the world, the news,
Hmm.
you know, the media, friends, you know, other people's stuff that they want you to help them with. So I think that it's so important to also have that balance of, you know, inner growth, but also that connection to the world as you're doing the work.
Yes. It reminds me of a friend in Costa Rica once asked me a question. We were driving, and she's like, "Why is the Dalai Lama so peaceful?" And I thought it was like, I don't know, I was like, "Is this a trick question?" I have no idea. She's like, "Because he's the Dalai Lama. He's been like in a temple since birth, and everything else is done for him. So he's never had to deal with like the real world and move through the things that we have to move through and be triggered. We have to like attempt inner peace while constantly being, I don't want to say attacked, but constantly being interrupted
Yeah.
while we're trying to heal."
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you lose your place, you know, if you keep the interaction, but that's where the strength comes in, you know, that ability to have one foot in each world kind of thing, you know, the world of chaos and then your own inner peaceful world,
Hmm.
or even inner chaotic world, but just that connection between the outer and the inner, you know, that
Hmm.
a lot of us struggle to have, you know, that balance because a lot of times we're either very externally focused or very internally focused, you know.
Hmm.
It's really good to have that duality, you know, ability to integrate your personal experience with those around you and what's going on.
Because we do live in a dualistic world for better or for worse.
Yeah,
But you did say you received this message in ceremony, and you're alluding to your ayahuasca ceremony.
yeah.
What does the role of plant medicine play, if any, in this kind of grieving, healing, growth process?
So this is the interesting part, you know, because trauma therapy is very conscious. You know, you can't be on any sort of, you know, not even medication because
Hmm.
it blocks the processing. But that's different because you're cognitively shifting, you know, these thoughts and emotions. Whereas when you go to ceremony, any sort of plant ceremony, it's more like things that you're not even aware of come up. So in
Hmm.
therapy, you know what you want to address. I mean, it might go
There's
into
like a
something else.
roadmap.
Yeah, yeah, there's a plan, you know,
Hmm.
some sort of at least, I mean, and that's the thing in trauma therapy, you never know where it's going to go. So you might have one intention, but end up somewhere else. But at least you have a direction, you have, you know, some sort of goal, what you want to heal. Now, in
Hmm.
plant medicine ceremonies, yeah, you go with your intention, but you never know what's going to happen, you know? You can have other stuff come up that you have no idea. You might not even been aware that it was a problem. And that's the magic of it. The fact that it's like it's gonna slap you in the face with what you need to see. And this is why a lot of people have a lot of resistance to it, or they're like, "Oh, that was horrible." Because a lot of times when people have, you know, bad trips or whatever experiences, it's because it's not that you're physiologically reacting to something, you know, negatively. It's more
Hmm.
like the stuff that comes up you can't deal with, you know, whether it shows you that you're a shitty person or it shows you, you know, of like traumatic stuff that you've been through before. And you just have to be willing to accept everything that you see. And don't take it as literal, you mean, because you're going to see some creepy, weird stuff. But
Hmm.
you know, it's symbolism, you know, a lot of it is symbolism and metaphors. And
Hmm.
so it's about knowing, being in touch with that. And what comes up, you know, you analyze it. You're like, what does this mean to me? Why is this important? Why did I see this today? You know,
Hmm.
why did it come up? So I think it's that whole notion of being comfortable with whatever part of yourself that you know, you might not have been comfortable before,
Hmm.
and just allowing that to happen, allowing that to be part of your identity. Because yeah, we might have done something bad, or we might have experienced something bad, or we might have witnessed something bad, but it doesn't have to lock you into that. You know, it doesn't have to
Hmm.
always be part of your like energy field. So I think
Hmm.
the integration of that really releases you from that being bound to that, you know, that memory or that persona or you know that victim mentality or whatever. I think just coming to terms with stuff that happens and stuff, you know, just even if you're not prepared for it, is really important in moving on in a lot of ways. And it's so liberating, honestly. It really is so liberating. And there's a lot of healing. It's honestly like 10 years of therapy in like one night. I don't even know how to explain it. It's crazy. But it's, and you hear people's stories, the next morning, and you're like, wow, people that have been grieving deaths and just, losses of all kinds. And, or just a lot of people use it to quit addictions, like heroin addictions, or any sort of addictions, because it's so healing. And a lot of times addictions are tied to trauma, and traumatic memories and experiences. So I think resolving that really helps, the person, in the sense that it gives them a sense of strength. It gives them a sense of character and insights to themselves. And it gives them a sense of hope. Maybe they feel peace, because it really is a compassionate way of showing. It's, I mean, it can be terrifying, but it really is compassionate. And it's like you're able to view stuff and be like, wow, okay, and I don't know, it's just like a different way of experiencing the healing than trauma.
It seems like, almost in the way that you're describing it, like the chemically induced, like, Buddhist ideal of moving into, or even the Vedic idea of moving into the observer position of your own life. That's true.
Yeah, like in meditation, the same thing. I mean, obviously it's different because, in meditation you're clean, you don't use anything, but it's that notion of watching your thoughts and observing your thoughts. Is, it's like they're just weather, passing clouds or storms, and it's, that notion of just write it out. You gotta get, the only way out is through, and it really provides that structure, in the sense that no matter what chaos you go through, it's gonna be done, as long as you stick to it and kind of ride that wave, and you can use that in life in so many ways, just maybe with like a job that's taking forever, or a situation that you're really anxious to get through. It just kind of write it out, and there's going to be change, and it's going to, not always get better, but it's going to get different, You're not always going to be in the same situation always forever. So
I think we're not very good at that. The idea of waiting, especially in like modern day life, of like, oh, this will eventually be better, or this will eventually be different, at least. I think we're very used to being able to like push a button, take a pill, like do something immediate to change our circumstance. Yeah. And it sounds like this experience can allow us to learn that ability, or start to learn that ability of being able to ride something out and see it, how it changes and flows.
Absolutely. And I've tried so many different modalities, breath work, meditation, all this stuff throughout my life. And I still practice all of it, but for some reason, in ceremony, it's like you get tossed into the fire, So it's like,
sounds terrifying.
It really is terrifying. I'm not gonna lie, but it's afterwards, the sensation is just amazing. Like once you're through it, and it's the next morning, and you're like, wow, I can't believe I went through all that, and it's just, I mean, it's really intense, physically, emotionally, mentally, crazy, but it's just it's a relief, and it's just something that it makes you kind of welcome challenges, in the sense that you're like, all right, well, what do you got for me next, because you become stronger, and you become more resilient on so many levels. And just by facing all that darkness and the fears and, the obstacles that you faced in the past, it really has given you more of a sense of, I guess, knowledge of yourself, and then like introspection into yourself. And that's a beautiful thing. It doesn't stop at ceremony. That's the easy part, like you say, and yogis say, like, the hard work is off the mat, then it's after that you get back to reality, and then you got to deal with work and friends and family and traffic, and things like that. And then applying that to, your everyday situation, like in any sort of therapy or whatever,
And I want to highlight that this is a ceremony. You're not just like taking acid and going into the woods, right?
This is really from Native American, a shaman, medicine woman. It's totally, it's not like somebody's basement,
Yeah, because what we see, or what is presented mostly online, is people just like going on these trips, like unled, no container. And, I think that's the difference between just like doing drugs to have a good time and like taking plant medicine as part of a bigger ceremony.
Absolutely. And now I'm glad that they're doing all these studies. You know, John Hopkins University is doing stuff with, you know, MDMA and psilocybin mushrooms, you know, to see the effects it has on PTSD, depression, anxiety, and other things, you know. And I think that's so important because a lot of times, and this is a lot of callers, and I wish I could tell them about this stuff, but I can't, you know. But a lot of people would just benefit from it because, you know, they go to the psychiatrist and they have all these pharmaceuticals, and a lot of them,
Mm.
you know, are more suicidal than when they started, you know, and it's such a roller coaster, and we don't know how pharmaceuticals are going to affect people, and there's so many side effects. So I think this is a good solution, you know, that they're doing this research because I think it helps a lot of people without giving them those adverse side effects. And yeah, it's totally structured, you know, you know, it's a legit, you know,
Right.
thing, and it's part of a, and it's that's the thing, it's a ritual, it's a healing
Mm.
ritual, and pretty much when you have a healing ritual, especially in Native American ceremonies, it's about recreating yourself and going back to the origins and going back to the beginning of the creation so you can co-create with the universe. And that's the idea of it. You're pretty much stripped of everything, you know, that you've learned and known, in the sense that it gives you that relief of, you're like, wow, this is me, just my bare self, my bare soul. And you have the opportunity to just create yourself after that, you know. And it really it can be liberating for so many people because the stuff that they've held on to, the stuff, you know, the resentments, you know, the negative patterns, they're like, oh, that's not me. I don't have to be that person, you know. And I think it's amazing. I mean, it's just nothing short from magical from what I've seen, the people that go there, and, you know, what I've experienced. It's really
Mm.
like, wow,
I
you know.
guess you release those ego identifiers, like, oh, Kristen Yorka is this person, so she makes these choices, you know, stripped of like this personality in this body at this time. I feel like then the world